Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a stack of sources today, specifically a really insightful article, and wow, the huge community discussion it sparked. It gives us a fascinating look at the world of JavaScript frameworks as we head into 2025.
Yeah, our mission here is really to cut through the noise, you know,
Hmm.
extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from this deep dive, and help you understand what's really going on in the developer landscape right now.
The core topic. It's the state of JavaScript frameworks. The article reflects on this journey, this quest we've all been on, trying to find simplicity in web development.
But somehow consistently encountering complexity instead.
Right. And of course, looking ahead to what 2025 might actually hold after all this, well, exploration.
And this wasn't just a dry technical read, was it?
No, not at all. Get ready for some surprising facts, some deep technical points, and maybe even a few, let's say, very heated opinions from the community weighing in.
This isn't just about listing technologies. It's about understanding the underlying trends, the challenges, and the passionate, sometimes kind of contentious debate happening right now among the people building the web.
So let's jump right into the article itself. The central theme that the author, Ryan Tarniato, lays out is pretty direct, isn't it? This whole quest for simplicity over the past few years, it hasn't actually made things simpler overall.
Exactly. He's basically observed that the problems we're trying to solve, they're inherently complex. And the tools we've built, also complex. His blunt take, there are, quote, no silver bullets.
Hmm.
We've spent years exploring new approaches, and it's been, I guess, a sobering realization that the fundamental difficulty hasn't just, evaporated.
And a huge part of that exploration was this big push centered around what the article calls the promise of the server.
Right. We saw this massive narrative build over the last 5 years, really urging developers to make things server first. It felt like a major pendulum swing back to, what, about a decade of client-centric SPAs dominating the conversation?
Yeah, and factors like the pandemic shifting everything online and, well, a lot of money flowing into tech seemed to really amplify that trend, didn't it?
Absolutely. It fueled the creation of a whole wave of new server-first meta frameworks.
Hmm.
The names Svelte Kit, Astro, Remix, Solid Start, Quick, Fresh, Analog popped up.
Right.
Plus, established players like Next.js and Nuxt, they went through significant upgrades to embrace these server-side patterns more deeply.
And they weren't all doing it the same way either. We saw different architectural ideas being explored, like SPA-influenced isomorphic approaches.
Yeah, where the same code runs but behaves differently on the client and server, versus the more maybe MPA-influenced split execution methods like islands or React server components.
Where different pieces are explicitly designed to run only on the server or only on the client.
Exactly. The hope was maybe finding a universal solution, but that gap, that sort of fundamental difference in how you structure your app, it's remained wider and frankly more complex than many anticipated.
Still, out of this, we got some seriously impressive technical advancements, right? Features like Next.js's app router.
Uh-huh. View transitions for smoother page changes, out-of-order streaming for faster initial renders, server functions, optimistic updates.
Server islands, single flight mutations. Really powerful stuff.
Yeah, the raw capabilities are, well, they're amazing. But he also points out that the moment you try to bring all these features together into one cohesive application,
The complexity just skyrockets.
it really does. And measuring the real success, the actual benefit, that's been tricky. He mentioned seeing cases where, like, benchmarks just fail to capture the whole picture.
Or performance improvements got credited to the shiny new tech when the real cause was something simpler elsewhere.
Exactly that. Performance misattribution, he called it.
Hmm. It seems like wading through all that complexity has even led some developers, well, maybe back towards simpler, more traditional server approaches, not even trying to run client-side JS frameworks on the server.
He notes that's a perfectly valid, often great choice for certain projects, especially where, super interactive client-side features aren't the main focus.
Right.
But from the perspective of pushing the boundaries of that server-client integration, it's maybe less interesting, as he puts it. His point is that just defaulting back to the server didn't magically make everything simple again either.
So the promise of the server brought capabilities, but also definitely complexity. What else does the article highlight as a source of both that power and complexity?
Well, he turns next to compilation to the rescue. And compilation, I mean, it's absolutely fundamental to modern JavaScript development, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's not just about turning our code into something browsers understand anymore. It's how we overcome limitations, bridge gaps.
Exactly. Whenever there's something missing, maybe a browser feature we need that isn't quite there yet, or clunky JS syntax we want to avoid, or just needing to fundamentally transform code compilation is our go-to tool.
Right. It enables practically everything we rely on. TypeScript checking our types.
Linting, tree shaking for dead code, code splitting, minification, making that isomorphic code possible, even advanced stuff like macros and DSLs is
Yeah.
the foundation.
And the author really emphasizes this. He sees compilation as the root of most complexity in our tooling.
Yeah.
And he points to a really interesting development from 2024, this kind of face-off between the React Compiler and Svelte 5 runes.
This is fascinating because they represent really different philosophies trying to solve similar problems, and both need deep compiler work. The React Compiler is designed to automatically optimize component re-renders.
Trying to cut down unnecessary computations without the developer having to manually memoize everything.
Exactly. Which is kind of ironically similar to what the Svelte 3 compiler aimed to do years ago, just
Right.
by default.
Okay, and Svelte 5 runes, what's the idea there?
That's essentially new syntax, like syntactic sugar, layered on top of a fine-grained signals renderer. Now, that signals approach, that was famously pioneered by Solid.js, right?
Right, Solid was all about signals from the start.
So you have this situation. React is trying to optimize re-renders, something Svelte used compilation to mostly avoid before. And Svelte is adopting a signals model, which Solid really built its whole identity around.
Wow, so they're kind of like swapping playbooks?
In a way, yeah. Both are trading aspects of their original core appeal. React is acknowledging, maybe implicitly, that managing re-renders is a problem needing a compiler-level solution, while Svelte is trading some of its famous minimal syntax for more expressiveness, more capability, and building on this different performance model with signals.
And the author's point is?
That both of these significant shifts involve increasing the underlying tooling complexity compared to their previous versions. The long-term impact, how these actually play out for developers day to day, that's still being evaluated.
It really drives home that idea that even when frameworks evolve to fix things or adopt powerful new patterns, it often means adding more layers underneath, more for the tools to handle.
Precisely. The foundation just gets more intricate.
Okay, shifting gears a little, the article also touched on the emerging role of AI and dev tools.
He sees compilation and bundling as these crucial foundational pieces for future, more dynamic AI-powered development solutions. The immediate impact on the frameworks themselves is still pretty small, though.
Right, but AI is already improving the local developer experience, yeah.
Definitely. Like seeing tools and concepts emerge around AI generating simple apps, or Vercel's V0 for quickly spinning up prototypes from descriptions.
Or static analysis tools like React Scan helping find performance problems like those tricky, unnecessary re-renders.
Yeah, it highlights this growing need for deeply integrated supporting tools. He mentions projects like Biome and Void Zero, this foundational tooling layer. That seems to be where AI is starting to make a tangible difference in our day-to-day work as developers.
Moving into the article's looking forward section, one trend he spots starting in late 2024 is what he kind of cheekily dubs a server second swing.
This is interesting. After that big server push, we're seeing a slight shift back towards, well, enabling client-side capabilities again, where they make sense.
So frameworks like SvelteKit, SolidStart, Remix started adding or significantly improving their SPA modes.
Exactly. And Remix even ported some functionality that had become server exclusive back into its client-side React router library. SolidStart's server function concept also influenced HandStackStart, another React framework built on sort of similar principles.
So maybe refining the balance, not just going all in on server first. He also predicts we'll see a continued trend in local first and sync engine technologies gaining traction.
Another point he makes, which I found quite interesting, is that sometimes slow and steady wins the race. He notes that while overall developer satisfaction might be leveling off or even declining for some tools, frameworks like Vue and Angular actually showed positive growth and satisfaction in recent surveys, even if they aren't always the ones generating the most hype or the most radical innovation.
Why does he think they're worth watching in 2025 then?
Not necessarily for pushing the bleeding edge of new tech, but for focusing on developer happiness, stability, and ease of maintenance.
Ah, the practical stuff.
Exactly. He stresses this is especially important when budgets are tight and teams just need to build and maintain applications reliably. He kind of says sometimes the best tool isn't the most innovative, but the one that helps you get the job done consistently.
That makes sense. He also talks about signal growing pains. Signals, that pattern Solid.js popularized, they're now pretty widespread outside of React Svelte 5 Angular Vue.
Right, they offer these potential performance benefits based on fine-grained reactivity. But as more developers actually use them in production, they're starting to bump into the inherent trade-offs.
Okay.
The author feels these are relatively minor issues overall, but he speculates that as developers gain more experience with these trade-offs, they might actually develop a new appreciation for how React handles reactivity, even with its different model and known issues like use effect.
But he does add that signals are still evolving rapidly.
Yeah, he thinks as the community learns more, they'll likely find new ways to showcase their unique value over the next year. It's not a settled picture yet.
And just quickly, that slightly cynical note, he included a line about web components. Just kidding.
Yeah, that seemed to reflect a common sentiment or maybe just an observation about their current role, or lack thereof, in the mainstream framework landscape discussion.
So wrapping up the article's view, his conclusion for the next 12 months doesn't really involve predicting some huge revolutionary tech leap, does it?
No, not really. He feels the community is still digesting the complexity we've already introduced. He even observes that some technical discussions tend to devolve into simpler debates about, like, syntax rather than tackling the deep architectural challenges. He thinks 2025 will be more about reflection and consolidation than radical innovation.
He reiterates that there's just a ton of complexity to manage, hard decisions about where to invest your team's time and resources.
And while the potential for powerful new solutions exists in the current tools, the right, easily understandable, and consumable combination isn't quite clear yet. It's still being figured out.
His final thought from the article. The core complexity isn't going away anytime soon. 2025 feels like a year to kind of hunker down and get stuff done with the tools and patterns we have now.
Yeah, buckle down, basically.
Okay, so the article gives us this picture of a complex, evolving landscape. But here's where it gets really interesting, because the comment section on this article, wow, it absolutely exploded.
Oh, yeah.
Diverse, passionate, and often very, very strong opinions.
It truly shows how invested developers are in their tools, doesn't it? And the debate quickly zeroed in on this core, almost existential question for some. Given everything we've just discussed, is React still a viable choice for starting new projects?
Or are other frameworks now just, objectively superior?
And one commenter, Jose Pablo Ramirez Vargas, really doubled down on that idea that React is dead. Specifically for new projects, he clarified.
Right. He acknowledged, yes, there are millions of existing React apps that need maintenance. Can't ignore that.
But for greenfield projects, he argued pretty forcefully that React and Angular are objectively bad performers. He cited specific benchmarks, like Krausist and the Transitive Bullshits Framework Benchmarks chart.
Pointing out where Angular with the signal still performed near the bottom on that one.
Right. His stance was basically, frameworks scoring better on these metrics are objectively better choices, period.
And he specifically called out Svelte as objectively superior based on those benchmarks, highlighting things like its smaller estimated code base size, maybe 25–35% less code, he guessed, and a supposedly flatter learning curve.
And he didn't stop there. He was quite critical of relying on large ecosystems. He suggested they cater to, in his words, weak or average developers who depend on others to build libraries. His view was that strong programmers can program what they need. He saw the widespread continued adoption of React almost as a kind of zombie land, or developers acting like sheep just following the crowd instead of making objective, data-driven choices.
And he dismissed the idea that funding, like Facebook backing React, means anything if the framework itself is, by today's standards, poor.
Yeah, arguing a framework is only worth considering if it offers something truly unique that others can't do, which he felt React lacks now. That's a pretty strong take.
It is. But as you'd expect, the comment section wasn't just him. Many others jumped in with nuanced counterarguments and different perspectives. For instance, Ethan Glover provided specific technical criticisms of React.
Right, pointing out known pain points like the difficulties with the use effect hook and sometimes unclear component life cycles.
He also described state management in React as, I think he said, a bit of a mess, saying libraries like Tanstack Query, Redux, or Legend State often feel like they're fighting the framework rather than working seamlessly with it.
Yeah, and he noted that React, especially with its focus shifting towards server components, maybe doesn't feel truly reactive in the same way other frameworks aim to be, and perhaps cares less about traditional client-side rendering now.
He acknowledged React's low barrier to entry, but warned this can make it a foot gun, easy to shoot yourself in the foot with common mistakes.
But interestingly, Ethan Glover also jumped in to defend Angular, which Ramirez Vargas had kind of lumped in with React as a bad performer.
Yeah, what did he say about Angular?
He highlighted its maturity, its stable and predictable update cycle, Google's continued significant investment, including merging it with their internal Wiz framework, and its recent technical improvements.
Like supporting signals since version 6.2.
Exactly. And deprecating the complex zone.js change detection, de-emphasizing RxJS and common patterns. He also mentioned features like event replay and flexible route-level render modes.
And he made a crucial point about comparisons, right?
Yes. He argued that Angular's built-in one-stop shop approach, handling compilation, forms, routing, SSR, all that stuff within the framework, means it really should be compared to meta frameworks like Next.js or TanStack Start, not just to React, the UI library, which is intentionally more minimal.
That's a fair point.
And he added a very practical, real-world consideration to the whole debate. Nobody is hiring for Solid quick compared to the massive job markets for Angular and React developers. That's a factor companies and devs just can't ignore.
Speaking of practical factors, Thomas Rota brought a different kind of pragmatism into the mix.
He argued that framework choice isn't just about raw performance benchmarks. It depends heavily on the specific application's needs, the desired user experience.
What kind of app you're building? Like for an internal back office tool, maybe bleeding edge rendering speed isn't the top priority.
Exactly. And he listed several compelling, non-benchmark reasons to pick React today. The sheer ease of hiring with so many React devs out there.
The huge ecosystem, libraries for almost anything.
Better AI tool support, just because there's more React code for models to train on. The stability old code generally keeps working. And yes, the corporate funding and backing.
He shifted the focus from blazingly fast to blazingly productive, didn't he?
Yeah, suggesting that being highly effective with your team is often more critical than chasing micro-optimizations. He also argued that modern deployment strategies, SSG, ISR, SSR, CSR, smart caching, often make those script-level rendering performance differences less relevant in the grand scheme of perceived user speed anyway.
That's a really strong counterpoint to just focusing on the benchmarks. Roland Ayala echoed some of this from his personal experience, too.
He showed that while he personally liked the developer experience, the DX, of frameworks like Solid, Quick, and Svelte more,
He actually found that the React ecosystem, with its breadth and maturity, consistently led to greater productivity for his actual work.
yeah. And he expressed concerns about the long-term adoption and stability of some smaller frameworks ecosystems. He mentions specific examples like QuickUI struggling or the Cobalt framework being basically a one-man show.
Ecosystem risk.
Exactly. He reiterated that the React ecosystem isn't just a bunch of wrapped vanilla JS libraries. It's this whole interconnected world of tools and patterns. He also agreed with Thomas that maybe many developers are chasing theoretical performance they don't actually need for their applications.
And he aligned with Ethan Glover on the real technical challenges for React being more around reactivity and lifecycle management rather than just raw rendering speed in isolation.
Jonah also piled on with those pragmatic reasons for React, reinforcing the points about the ecosystem, ease of learning and hiring, AI tools, stability, funding.
Bringing it back to that core idea from the article, there's no silver bullet.
Right. Framework choice involves this complex weighing of many factors, not just whether a framework has feature X or scores Y on benchmark Z.
And Joel Bonnar added another layer, pointing out that across the board, major frameworks seem to be moving towards feature parity on many fronts anyway.
Yeah, he cited examples like streaming server rendering and signals, which started maybe in one place but are now being implemented or explored across many.
And he argued that with the level of fine-grained control we have now over rendering strategies, SSG, ISR, SSR, CSR, caching, the whole debate about tiny script-level performance differences gets ridiculously obliterated by these higher-level optimizations.
Pretty much. He had a great line, too, suggesting that anyone who thinks their chosen tool is perfect or has no drawbacks probably isn't a very good analyst of the landscape.
Huh. That's fair.
It really speaks to the complexity and the trade-offs inherent in all these tools. There was even this fascinating mini-debate that broke out just about code maintainability.
Oh, yeah. How did that go?
Tomas Rota started it, arguing less lines of code is better, giving an example where React code was way shorter than a vanilla TypeScript equivalent for something complex. Jose Pablo Ramirez Vargas, even though he was pro-Svelte, generally agreed less code can be better, but cautioned against taking it to extremes.
And then someone else jumped in?
Yeah, commenter Squidby offered a crucial counterpoint. Clarity is ultimately more important than just raw brevity. They warned against too-clutter code that's hard to read and maintain, especially for newer team members.
Favoring readability, even if it means a few more lines, that's such a classic tension in software development, isn't it?
It really is. And finally, Eustachio offered a bit of humor, responding to the React is dead claims by just pointing out the millions of weekly React downloads on NPM.
Jokingly calling the users zombies or sheep, but then making the point.
That on some level, everyone is following a crowd or a trend, whether they realize it or not. It's just how communities work.
That comment kind of perfectly captures the mix of technical debate and community dynamics here. This whole discussion, from the article's analysis to the commenters' really passionate arguments, it synthesizes all these different viewpoints on what truly matters when you're staring down a new project and you have to pick your tools.
Yeah, is it purely objective performance benchmarks? Or is it these practical factors like developer productivity, the richness of the ecosystem, how easy it is to hire people, long-term stability, the specific needs of this project, or even just personal familiarity and what brings you joy when you're actually coding?
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to navigate this complex and sometimes really noisy landscape? We've seen how that push for simplicity in web development ironically led us through a phase of introducing new kinds of complexity, particularly around server-side patterns and very sophisticated compilation.
We've explored how different forms of server-side rendering are finding their place, how compilation is both absolutely essential and also complicates our tooling, and how AI is beginning to influence the developer experience, mostly at that tooling layer for now.
And most vividly, I think, we've seen a community intensely wrestling with all these ideas. Passionate arguments were made on every side, citing performance numbers, sure, but also balancing those against the practical realities of staffing teams, maintaining large applications over years, and just the sheer experience of day-to-day development.
It's abundantly clear that this landscape isn't simple. And as the article author concluded, it's probably not likely to dramatically simplify anytime soon. 2025 feels less like a year for some revolutionary new technology and maybe more like a period for digesting the changes we've already seen.
And focusing on effectively implementing solutions with the tools we have now.
Exactly. For you, the learner, trying to make sense of all this deep dive hopefully shows that there are many valid perspectives, many different ways to measure what makes a framework good.
And no single universal right answer for every project or every team. The best tool really does seem to depend heavily on your specific context and your priorities.
We've journeyed through the recent past and looked toward the near future of JavaScript frameworks. We've uncovered major trends in server-side approaches, tried to understand the double-edged sword of compilation, and waded into that vibrant, sometimes pretty intense community debate about which tools are truly the best, and crucially, why people believe that.
We heard strong cases made based on objective measurements like those performance benchmarks, but we also heard equally powerful arguments centered on the practical, human elements like developer productivity, the strength of supporting ecosystems, the availability of talent, and the long-term maintainability of the code you actually write.
Which really brings us to an important question for you to think about. In a world where even the experts and these passionate developers disagree so strongly on what metrics matter most, and where complexity seems to be an inherent feature rather than a bug, how do you approach making those critical decisions about your technology stack?
How do you weigh all these different factors, the benchmarks, the ecosystems, the learning curves, the specific demands of your project, and yeah, even your own team's familiarity and preferences to make the best possible choice for the job right in front of you and navigate this complex world effectively?